Thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. It's great to see all of you. My name is Suzanne Pichetti Johnson. I'm the program manager for Avenues to Wellness, and we are a program of the Frank R. Howard Foundation. So a big thank you to the foundation for making this speaker series possible. And now I am very pleased to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Erin Mendoza. Erin is a late identified autistic therapist. She works with adults and teens, and she's going to be speaking from a personal and a professional perspective tonight. So thank you very much.
Hi, and welcome. This little QR code up here will let you, there's a few kind of like you can fill in, answer questions and stuff like that as we go through this. I know if you're anything like me or, most autistic people, you probably are not going to be the one raising your hand to say things in the middle of a big group of people. So this will allow people to enter responses on their phones and it'll show up on the screen anonymously. I will still take, if people do want to just raise their hands or ask questions that way, that's also fine. So, and the screens where this is going to be relevant, the QR code will show up again. So, like Suzanne said, I am late identified autistic therapist. I figured out that I was autistic shortly before the pandemic and then decided at that point that I was going to start. I was in all of these autistic Facebook groups and was seeing all of these people who were saying, I wish I could have an autistic therapist. And so I was like, hey, I could do that. And so I started doing telehealth therapy primarily with autistic clients, and I've been doing that for the last 6 years or so. And then about a year and a half ago, I also added doing assessments for autism and ADHD with adults, some teens on like a case-by-case basis. And so I've been doing that too. I just recently, within this last year, now have an office space in Willits, so I'm doing some in-person and still a lot of telehealth. Things that I enjoy are singing. I know, a lot of people probably know me around here for that. And then I have some ravens that I feed that are also kind of a special interest. And I'm learning how to garden. And then also just learning more about autism and being able to help other people learn about it is, another thing that I really enjoy doing, and helping people kind of figure out, once they know they're autistic, like, what do you do with that information? All right, so here's the first one. If you would like to, you could enter as many of these as you would like. I'm just curious to see why people came tonight. Okay, so we have kind of a mix here. A few people that are actually autistic or know that they are, more people who are wondering if they might be, and then the highest is people who know somebody that's close to them who's autistic, some people here who work with autistic people, and some people who are just wanting to learn about it. Because I know for me, I think, I'm autistic, I have people that are close to me that are autistic, and I work with autistic people, so 3 of those would be true for me. So we're going to go through the diagnostic statistic manual, the criteria that are used to actually diagnose autism, and kind of break it down as far as how those different criteria might show up for an adult, especially a high-masking adult, an adult who's made it this far in life without getting a diagnosis. And just as a kind of a note that the DSM primarily focuses on external behaviors, so basically however the symptoms of autism are affecting the people around the autistic person, rather than on the internal experience of being autistic. And so we'll kind of talk back and forth about that a little bit too. So another chance to answer what's something that you've heard about autism. So empathy and high sensitivity that isn't always detected by neurotypicals. Just in case people aren't familiar with that term, neurodivergence is an umbrella term that includes autism, ADHD, along with a lot of other things, dyslexia, PTSD, OCD, anything basically that's kind of different about someone's brain. And neurotypical is people who don't have any kind of neurodivergence. There's probably not very many people who are completely neurotypical, but it's kind of the way our society is built. So it's kind of useful to compare to, people that have some kind of neurodivergence often have some way that they don't fit into the way our society was built. So, people with autism are more likely to think or speak literally, easily overstimulated, problematic, annoying, savant, fixated. They don't communicate well, they're socially awkward. It's a problem or to be feared. Asperger's is a mild form. Folks with it are usually very bright. There's low and high functioning autism. Each person with autism is unique, and that autism is a disability or a superpower. Autistic sense of justice. That the spectrum is wide, meaning from non-functioning to high functioning. Missing social cues. Things are assumed a lot. Limerence is a common hyperfixation on people, which makes me feel like I am too much. So many ways that an autistic person can appear normal to outsiders by internally managing their symptoms to live their best lives. Someone pointed out to me that my synesthesia put me on the spectrum. It seems like it's a condition that can be a blessing and a curse. Okay, that was a lot of good answers. Okay, so the criteria, section A has 3 different categories, and you have to have all 3 of them. I'm going to use, the DSM uses the word deficits. I'm going to use the word differences because it's not a deficit. It is just a difference in how autistic people are wired. So persistent differences in social communication and social interactions across multiple contexts, as shown by all of the following that we're going to go through. So the first one, differences in social emotional reciprocity. So some of the examples from the DSM are differences in how people approach social situations, differences in how just a back and forth conversation happens, differences in showing emotions, and differences in initiating or responding to social interactions. So here's some ways that might show up for a higher masking or late identified autistic person. These are some of the things that I might hear if I'm doing an assessment. I hate small talk. When I was a kid, I was really shy and I didn't talk to anyone at all. I watched movies or television or YouTube or I Googled. I'm too young or too old to have Googled, but I do have people that come in for assessments that Googled how to talk with people to see how, get examples, have things they can mimic, that kind of stuff. Everyone else seemed to know what the social rules were. I have always felt different and like I don't belong. And I know for me, a lot of these things were true. I was very shy and didn't talk to people. I do remember being in junior high and high school and just watching the conversations around me, trying to figure out how people could maintain a conversation with somebody else, because I couldn't do that. And then, just the kind of like feeling different and, how does everybody else just know how to do this? The next one is the differences in nonverbal communication. So this is the big eye contact one that a lot of people know about. It can also be differences in understanding and using gestures and differences in facial expressions. So ways that might show up. I've learned to make eye contact, but I still hate it. People sometimes tell me I'm talking too loudly or too quietly, and I have no idea. I know my wife frequently tells me that. You're talking really loudly. You're talking really quietly. I can't hear you. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't think and make eye contact at the same time. That one's also true for me. Looking at somebody, I can listen, but if I need to think of my response, I have to look away. I can't maintain the eye contact or I won't be able to figure out what I want to say. People often think I'm angry by the look on my face, even though I'm not. I hear that one a lot for people that I'm assessing too, or they're having a lot of the time problems at work or in friendships. They're like, people just think I'm angry all the time, and I don't feel angry. I've just tried to communicate. So, and the third one is differences in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So that can be differences adjusting behavior for different social contexts, differences in making friends, or differences in the level of social interest or social needs. And ways that might show up, I'll hear people say, I didn't have any friends until I joined whatever activity was their thing, and they were able to connect with people through the activity. For me, it was choir. I was friends with the weird kid in elementary school, Autistic people tend to be drawn to other autistic people, even if you don't know you're autistic. I never know if I'm oversharing or not sharing enough is another big one. Or all of my close friends as an adult are autistic, have ADHD, or both is another one that I hear. B has 4 subcategories. You only have to have 2, but the internal experience of them kind of overlaps. So most people end up with all 4. We'll go through those. The first one is stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. So that could be lining things up, echolalia, which is repeating things that you've heard somebody else say, whether it's somebody that's present with you or from a movie. Flapping hands is another one. It's kind of a stereotype. Ways that this might show up. When I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I watch a show or movie I have seen 1,000 times before. I need to have the things on my bathroom counter or on my kitchen counter or wherever lined up just right. As a kid, I would repeat the jokes I heard for days, even though nobody thought it was funny anymore. I was bullied in middle school for using big words. A lot of this can be kind of like what they say, a formal use of language, where a lot of autistic people are hyperlexic. They learn to read at a young age, and they really enjoy reading, language, all of that. And so a lot of the time people will use the big words that other people their age are not using. For me, I remember since I was a kid, I would line things up in rainbow order. If there was different colors, it was going to be as much of a rainbow as I could make with whatever I had. But also, that's not on here, but people do kind of vocal stimming or humming. I was always humming as a kid, and I would get, have peers in my class tell me to stop because I had no idea that I was doing it. If you see me at the grocery store now, I will probably be humming because that's just what I do. And then another way this can show up is scripting, where you have kind of a set thing that you're going to say in a certain situation, whether that's calling in an order to go, whether that's I need to make a doctor appointment, or any other kind of regular type of interaction that you can have kind of a memorized script for to help you get through it. Oops, I misspelled that. But insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, or ritualized patterns of behavior. So having distress at small changes, difficulty with transitions, rigid thinking patterns, needing things to be the same every day. And ways that this can show up. If I'm hyper-focused on an activity, it's very distressing to be interrupted. Hyper-focus is where you're just so focused on what you're doing that you might forget you need to eat or drink or use the bathroom or anything else that's happening around you. And so getting pulled out of that can be really hard for autistic people. I remember having meltdowns when I was a kid because of last-minute changes to plans. I need to have the same coffee cup and same food for breakfast every day. When I get home from work, I usually sit in the car for a while before I can get myself to transition to go inside. The third one is the special interests, highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal, again, DSM with their judgy language, in intensity or focus. Ways that this might show up. When I was young, people told me I talked too much about my interests. As an adult, I have just recently started to allow myself to be in fandom communities, and it's amazing. I've had so many people come in who stopped sharing about or engaging with their special interests because other people were telling them that they were annoying, talking too much, or needed to move on. And then as they're able to kind of start identifying with being autistic, they're allowing themselves to get back into that, and it's really helpful for them. When I was a kid, I had boxes and boxes of rocks, and I would spend hours organizing them and cataloging them into notebooks. The things I'm passionate about aren't always the same, but I do deep dives on the things I'm interested in. That one can happen if somebody is autistic and ADHD. I'll go into that a little bit later, but autism and ADHD often co-occur and can affect each other. My job lines up with my special interest. A lot of autistic people who aren't burned out in their jobs probably have a job that lines up with the things that they're interested in. And then the last one here is hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input, or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. And some ways that this might show up. I had somebody tell me they have to wear socks to bed or they can't sleep, which doesn't make any sense to my brain, but for them, that's what they needed. I use my noise-canceling headphones almost everywhere. As a kid, I hated having sand on my hands, even though I loved going to the beach. I can't eat anything with blueberries or anything with a similar texture baked in it. When I'm overwhelmed, I need to be in the dark with my weighted blanket. Sensory things are interesting. There's a lot of people who, after being diagnosed as autistic, will come back and say, I feel like I'm more autistic now. And some of that is like an increased awareness of sensory things. It took me a few years after knowing that I'm autistic before I was like, I really hate the texture of broccoli and I don't want to eat it. But people kind of like become aware of different things as they're learning more about themselves. And being aware of the sensory issues gives you the chance to kind of make accommodations for yourself. Like, I don't eat broccoli anymore. All right, so the next one. Even for people that are diagnosed as an adult, you have to have some kind of symptoms present earlier on in your life. So in the assessment process, there's a lot of, what do you remember being passionate about or having a special interest? Or tell me what your friendships were like when you were really little. Was it just, did it come easily? Was it you were friends with whoever the kids of your parents' friends were? Like, how did that look? And then the DSM now does say that autism might not show up completely until social demands exceed capacity. So you can be an adult and hit that burnout wall and then get the diagnosis because all of a sudden your life has become too hard and you can't manage it anymore. And then also, a lot of autistic symptoms can be masked by strategies that people learn. The symptoms have to cause clinically significant impairment in different areas of functioning. For high-masking adults, a lot of the time they make it through the day okay, and they get home and they're done. They collapse. They can't get themselves to make dinner. They can't get themselves to get ready for bed or anything because they're just so wiped out. So that would also count as a functional impairment, even though they're kind of forcing themselves to get through the day. Sometimes we see that with kids too, where they make it through the school day and then the second they get home, there's just a huge meltdown because they've been masking all day. Masking is really useful sometimes and also incredibly exhausting, and people often can't do it for too long. We will talk more about meltdowns and shutdowns later. It's like autistic person has reached capacity and just can't anymore. And sometimes that's an outburst, sometimes that might be crying, sometimes that might be going into a shutdown where they're just kind of stuck inside themselves and not reacting to things. So these aren't technically criteria for the DSM. There's still things that most autistic people experience. So like we were saying, meltdowns can be sensory overwhelm, it could be emotional overwhelm, just being really stressed. Somehow your nervous system is at capacity and can't handle anything else. Sometimes you're at capacity and it's one tiny little thing that goes wrong and then the meltdown happens. I remember once I, ended up in a meltdown because my coat was in the wrong place in the coat closet. And that wasn't the actual thing, but that was what started the meltdown happening. And then a shutdown can be, like I was saying, kind of non-responsive. A lot of times people feel kind of like they're stuck in their head. I know for me, sometimes I feel like I'm watching myself and I'm agreeing to do things that I know are not going to be good for me to do because I'm pushing myself too hard, and I just can't stop myself from doing that. And so that's when I know I need to take a step back and take some breaks and kind of like re-regulate before I can continue on with the rest of life. And then autistic burnout is the other big one here. A lot of people come in for an assessment or get diagnosed as an adult because they're in autistic burnout. There can be different levels of this, but it can be to the point to where people can't work anymore. A lot of times people end up having co-occurring physical conditions with it. I know somebody who ended up having really bad migraines that came with vertigo, and so they were kind of stuck in bed because of the autistic burnout. And it can be a hard thing to come back out of, and a lot of people need support in different ways to be able to do that. Next interactive question. What is something new that you learned? I'm going to start reading some of these while people finish responding. Scripting and masking are associated with ASD. I have it on that have autism as I thought and be difficult. And it comes to got something very special to me, and I love him. All he has, I have it too. That makes it more special. Echolalia being a form of stimming. Shutdown is new to me. I didn't know how important physical placement of objects could be. That there are differences in the forms of autistic crashing, meltdowns, burnout, shutdown. Sitting in the car as a sign of difficulty with transitions. It was always called procrastination. Echolalia is an associated behavior. Done a lot of vocal stimming to comedy routines in my days. I love that. I'm recognizing that I have more symptoms than I was aware of before today. Many of the autistic qualities are shared by much of the population and shows how our unique human qualities need more allowance and acceptance. Yes. Can show up as an adult because social demands exceed capacity. I can feel the shutdown when it happens. My heart starts going fast. Rigid routines like the same breakfast every day. I get stuck in the car after work for a long time, another symptom I didn't know I had. I used to do that, well, I still do sometimes. I just get home and I'm like, I'm so tired, I can't go into the house, even though I'm tired and really want to be in the house. All right, misdiagnoses. By the time people get to be adults, a lot of them have, especially autistic people, have a long list of labels. And so I wanted to talk through some of the common ones that I see with people that I'm assessing and kind of some of the similarities between autism and those diagnoses and some of the ways that we differentiate. So, borderline personality disorder. This one is more common with people that are assigned female at birth, but assigned male at birth people can have it too. Some similarities between borderline personality disorder and autism are difficulties with relationships, difficulty regulating emotions, a diffuse sense of self, kind of the like, I just don't know who I actually am as a person, and then low self-esteem. So differentiating autistic social challenges are going to be more due to just not understanding the social rules or the social cues or things like that, rather than borderline where it's more of a kind of perceived sense of abandonment is a lot of the time what triggers any kind of reaction. Autistic people are more likely to have meltdowns from sensory overwhelm than from attachment injuries. And autistic people will meet the B criteria, the sensory issues, the special interests, the routines, and all of that stuff. People who are borderline, who are just borderline, won't have those things unless they are also autistic, which can happen. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder. This is, if you haven't heard of it, usually starts when kids are little from kind of not having the type of environment that they needed, whether that's just emotional neglect, whether that's physical or sexual abuse. It's kind of comes from ongoing trauma in someone's life. So similarities are hypervigilance. A lot of people that have PTSD have startle reflexes or are super aware of what's going on around them. Having negative beliefs about oneself, difficulty regulating intense emotions, dissociation. So the CPTSD hypervigilance is going to be connected to the trauma somehow, and the autistic sensory sensitivity isn't. Somebody can have both of those. CPTSD and autism do occur together a lot of the time, partly because autistic nervous systems are so much more sensitive than non-autistic nervous systems. And CPTSD might lead to social anxiety or avoidance, but it won't cause the differences in social understanding that come with autism. And dissociation is usually connected to a trauma trigger, and then autistic shutdown, which sometimes feel and look like dissociation, is kind of the sensory overwhelm, emotional overwhelm. They're two different things. Obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of autistic people can have intrusive and repetitive thoughts. Using actions or compulsions to regulate, difficulty with uncertainty. For obsessive compulsive disorder, the obsessive and intrusive thoughts can be for hours every day and cause significant distress. A lot of the time, for autistic people, it's kind of connected to a specific, something that you're worried about that's going to happen, or getting in bed at the end of the day and replaying all of the social interactions that you had to try and make sure that you did everything the way you wanted to or the way you were supposed to. And repetitive behaviors in autism usually serve the purpose of self-regulation, but they're not necessary. It's something bad is going to happen if you don't do them. And in OCD, there's the fear that if the compulsive behavior is not done, something terrible is going to happen. There are a lot of similar kind of neural pathways in OCD and autism. And so this one, there tends to be more overlap, and it kind of ends up becoming, if somebody is autistic, they might get the second diagnosis of OCD if they're experiencing a lot of distress, and if it's causing impairment in their lives, they can't do the things they want to do because of all of the obsessions and compulsions. Bipolar disorder is another one that people come in with a lot. So people in a manic episode are going to have kind of excessive talking. They're going to be really energetic, have high self-esteem, or feeling like they're better than other people. Goal-driven activities, they're just going to be super focused on, I'm going to figure out my whole life right now. I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to do this and this. To differentiate, autistic people can info dump about special interests. It'll probably be focused on the special interest, and someone in a manic episode might talk a lot about anything and everything. They're just have all of that energy and they need to get it out somehow. Sometimes autistic people can come across as being full of themselves because they're being direct in their communication. You might have an autistic person who says, yeah, I'm really good at this. You should let me do that. And a non-autistic person might not say it that way. And so sometimes that can be read as kind of being, thinking that they're better than other people. Autistic people can hyper-focus on activities, but it's generally for less duration than the goal-driven behavior that you would see in a manic episode. And then major depressive disorder. Some of the similarities, kind of low energy, low mood, lack of motivation to do things, isolating, all of those kinds of things. And differentiating depression, especially from autistic burnout. Depression often gets better with increased activity and social interactions. A lot of the time, the recommendation for people who are depressed is to go out and to do the things, and then you start feeling better. If somebody's in autistic burnout and they go out and they push themselves to do the things, they're going to feel worse. So that can be a big differentiation between major depression and autistic burnout. Autistic burnout can sometimes lead to depression. They can coexist. Because the isolation that is often needed to recover from autistic burnout also decreases the sense of connection. It makes it harder to engage with special interests, which can be another kind of helpful thing when people are in burnout. And so sometimes people end up with both of those things at the same time. Okay, and then there's autism and ADHD, and this really could be a whole presentation all by itself, so I'm going to keep it short. They often occur together. I don't know what the statistics are. I think that there's I know that there's a higher percentage, I don't know what it is. A higher percentage of autistic people also have ADHD, but there is still a significant number of people that have ADHD that are also autistic. So when I do assessments, unless somebody specifically says I only want to be assessed for this one thing, I usually assess for both. And there are a lot of ways that autism and ADHD can kind of be opposite of each other. For example, autism wants routines and wants things to be the same every day. And ADHD wants novelty and gets bored of the routines. I have a lot of people who have both that come in and they say, I crave routine, I need routine, I'm so much less stressed when I have it, and I can't stick to one. And it's kind of the, I have a routine, autism's like, here's our new routine, we're gonna do this, and ADHD is like, great, this is new, let's do it. And then a week or two later, ADHD is like, I am so bored of this is not gonna work, and you need to figure out something else. A lot of people have autistic anxiety that will accommodate the ADHD. This is me. I'm always early for things because my autistic anxiety will not let me lose track of what time it is. And I will be early or I will be very anxious. A lot of people, kids in school have that too, where it's, I caught on to the material quickly, I did the homework, and then I didn't have to pay attention anymore, but it's kind of that balance of like autistic anxiety, I need to get this done even though I'm not super interested in it, with the ADHD of this is really boring and I don't want to do it. So there's a lot of ways that the two of them interact. Sometimes it comes up in burnout too, where autism is like, I can't do anything, and then ADHD is like, I'm so bored, can we please go do something? And so I talk with clients a lot about trying to balance the two of those and the kind of the competing needs that they might have, but also the ways that they accommodate each other. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits of Identifying as autistic as an adult, I first want to say that self-identification is valid. There's been research on this, actually. Most people who are wondering if they might be autistic are going to autistically do a lot of research and talk to all of the people and learn all of the things and know as much as they can before they finally dare to say, oh, hey, I might be autistic. And accessing a formal assessment is not accessible for a lot of adults. It's expensive. There's more people like me that are doing kind of master's level assessments, which can't do everything that a doctoral level assessment can do, but can provide the validation, and it usually costs a lot less, but it's still expensive. And a lot of people just can't do that. Not all people who do assessments know what autism looks like in high-masking people. There's people who sometimes pay the money to get assessed, and they have an assessor who doesn't actually know what they're looking for, and so they might not get the diagnosis even if they are autistic. And that can be especially true for people assigned female at birth and people in marginalized communities. Some people do pursue a formal diagnosis because they want the validation and the confirmation. They want to feel sure about it for themselves. But people can be accepted and part of the autistic community without the formal diagnosis. Benefits of knowing that you're autistic if you are. Just having a better understanding of how your brain and your nervous system are wired. Being able to connect with other people who have similar brains and nervous systems and not feeling like you're the odd man out all of the time. Not feeling like a broken non-autistic person or like the ugly duckling in the room. Being able to increase awareness of sensory issues and how to better accommodate yourself. A lot of what I do with newly diagnosed autistic people in therapy is figure out what kinds of supports and accommodations are going to make their life more manageable for them now that they have this new information. And then people get to learn how to use stimming and special interests to help support their mental health and make their life more enjoyable. I'll talk with clients about that too. You know, what did you do when you were a kid to help yourself feel better that you probably don't do now as an adult because everybody told you not to do it? And kind of trying to bring that back, whether that's when they're home alone or when that's, you know, when they're out in the community like me humming in the grocery store now. But kind of being able to help manage their stress and overwhelm through special interests, through stimming and all of that kind of stuff. Questions, I will take hands, or you can put them in here, either way.
Do you know if there's any modern research about whether autism is hereditary?
I think that they've found that there is a genetic component to it.
Because I feel like it probably came from my dad.
Yeah, a lot of people have that experience. I'm autistic, my kid is autistic, my parents probably are too. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, like, how this works in terms of like with students, they have, you know, 504s or IEPs, but with adults, like, how does the, you know, the Disability Act work with autism and like that conflict between it's not really a disability, but it's like a, you know, early developmental.
Yeah, it definitely is a disability. I love being autistic, and there's a lot of things I like about it, and it is also very disabling sometimes. For adults, you can ask for formal accommodations at work for different things that are related to autism. In California, workplace cannot legally ask for the diagnosis. They just need to know what the impairments are, and so a therapist or a doctor or psychiatrist could help with doing a formal accommodation request for workplaces, and kind of would sit down and talk with you and figure out what you personally need to make your work more accessible for you. Do you train people to make eye contact? I think that one of the things I do talk with clients about is sometimes masking is beneficial. Sometimes we choose to mask in situations because it's going to help get what you need to get. It doesn't mean that it's not exhausting and that it's not going to be hard to do. So I think I would probably, if it was my client that was asking about this, we would have a conversation to figure out if the benefit is going to be, or, you know, worth like the cost, and it would be their choice to do it. I wouldn't tell somebody that they had to. Do I think it could be caused by vaccines? I think that has been fairly well ruled out. I don't personally do any of those studies, but that's what I have heard, that the studies have ruled that out. Yes.
Like, is therapy good for people with autism? Does it actually, can it help them with some of these disabling parts of it. Like, I think of it as something that is great about me, but also I live in a world that doesn't accommodate me.
Yeah.
Does therapy have a place in working with people with autism?
I think for a lot of autistic people, having a therapist who either is autistic or knows a lot about it and is going to come from an affirming viewpoint rather than, yes, you have to make eye contact in the job interview kind of thing, that it can be helpful for figuring out kind of problem solving, thinking outside the box, managing the sensory things, managing the social things, all of that kind of stuff. Being overstimulated from auditory irregularities can definitely be a sensory part of autism. I don't think it only occurs in autism, but it can be. The hypervigilance to social cues. And then let me read and then people perceiving autistic people as best friends, even though they were just masking. I think so. The second part can go both ways, where an autistic person meets someone and might automatically be like, oh, hey, now we're best friends. I'm going to add you on Facebook, and I'm going to be texting you every day. And the non-autistic person is like, wait, what? That's not how this works. So yes, I think that can happen both ways, where an autistic person might be masking and not being their true selves. And so then other people might perceive that there's more to the relationship than there is. And the hypervigilance to social cues, especially by the time people get to adults, they're going to have a lifetime of social situations where they misread things. And so that hypervigilance just kind of comes up as am I reading this wrong? Am I saying the right thing? Does my face look the right way? Am I making enough eye contact? Am I making too much eye contact? And so there's so many kind of just being hypervigilant to the cues that someone else is giving you to make sure that you're doing it right. Interaction between autism and CPTSD. There's a lot there, more than probably just a quick answer. I know that I've had people come to me saying, my therapist said that even if I'm autistic, I can't be diagnosed as an adult because I have trauma and that it won't be able to be distinguished. There are differences, kind of like we talked about, but they also affect each other. An autistic person who has, whatever childhood trauma on top of kind of autistic trauma, whether that's, just having people in your life be like, no, the lights aren't too bright. That's not too loud. Your clothes fit fine. Any of that kind of stuff that's kind of invalidating, just even the little things, can also kind of contribute to the complex trauma and can, kind of increase that interaction. Asperger's was a former diagnosis in the DSM, and it was a milder form of autism. It got removed and everything is just autism now. And then there's different levels that people can have that depending on the level of support needs that they have. Relaxing ways or tips to unwind after a long day. I think for most people, figuring out what the sensory sensitivities are, but also figuring out if there's sensory things that help you, whether that's listening to music, whether that's using the weighted blanket, and then also special interest things. And if you're exhausted after the long day and your special interest is basketball, maybe you're not going out to the court and playing basketball, but maybe you're finding videos about basketball or watching the NBA game if it's the right season for that. So, I'll talk with people a lot too about how to figure out how to get special interest time into their day, even if they're in the middle of burnout and don't have the physical energy. And yes, it is wild that, autistic people have always been here. And even just in the last 10 to 15 years, our understanding of the autistic experience has increased so much, which I think is why there are some professionals that are diagnosing autism that don't have that understanding because they haven't kind of kept up with the newer research about autism. But yeah, hormones are nobody's friend. There has been some research, limited research, because assigned female at birth and hormones and all of that don't get a lot of the research money, neither do autistic people. But, decrease in hormones that happens around perimenopause and menopause can absolutely increase sensory issues. It can increase depression and anxiety, which might, increase other autistic symptoms. It also has a big impact on ADHD symptoms. People start noticing that they can't remember things. So for people that have both, it can be very dysregulating because all of a sudden these things that you were kind of managing to hold together before are not working so well once the hormones start to drop. So it can have a really big interaction.
So I'm the adult sibling of someone who's diagnosed as an adult.
Okay.
And I want to be helpful.
Yeah.
And stand beside. And I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been there all along, but, to help.
Yeah. I think a lot of it might be kind of supporting and figuring out what is going to help them feel better. The sensory soothing things, the stimming, the special interests, and then on the other side of that, figuring out what can they do to decrease like the stressors and the sensory overwhelm and stuff. A lot of people do the like noise canceling or noise reducing headphones. Some people have fidgets that they just carry around with them all the time, and that can kind of help with some of the anxiety or, just helping regulate. But yeah, kind of figuring those things out and walking with them in that and normalizing some of that too. That, if you need to take a break, that's totally fine. And yeah, like those kinds of things. In terms of social labels, if given a label of high functioning, the person giving that label does not understand that they are lower functioning than the high functioning. That's part of the problem with the high functioning, low functioning level system. A lot of the adults that I assess are given a level 1, but that doesn't mean they might not change to level 2. If they, go deeper into burnout, it is possible to change between levels depending on kind of what else is going on in your life. There are people who are autistic. A lot of the time they have other kind of coexisting things, intellectual disability or dyspraxia, like a hard time controlling their muscles and their motor movements, that would probably kind of continuously be at a high support level type of place just because of the other stuff they have going on. But yeah, support levels are often can be invalidating for the people who are like, I'm really struggling with this. I'm massively in burnout and you're telling me that I am high functioning because I, had a job or I'm in a relationship even though it's not going great or, whatever. So can over-explaining social choices be a sign or symptom of autism? Definitely, just because social interactions are hard and often confusing, and autistic people tend to over-explain things anyway because they've had so many experiences of not being understood. And so a lot of autistic people will over-explain things just to make sure that people are understanding them correctly, which can then cause its own social problems.
How do you delineate what is going to be important context to someone else versus an excuse or unwelcome in that moment? And how do you swallow the emotional dysregulation of trying to not say something that you feel like, but you need to know this?
Yeah, that is hard. In an ideal world, the non-autistic person in that conversation should be making some accommodations too. As people are learning more about autism and autistic communication styles, that hopefully that will start to happen more where somebody can explain, I need to be able to, I'm giving you all of the information because I want to make sure you have what you need, even if you don't need all of what I have said. So kind of just even explaining, even if somebody isn't saying, I'm autistic, this is what I need, but saying, I really need direct communication. I need things to be in writing. I need you to know that I might say more information than you need, but I'm not sure exactly what you need, so I'm going to say it all anyway. And kind of giving that as like a front-loading type of thing. Like I was talking about, people don't necessarily need a formal diagnosis to, like a documented diagnosis, to kind of learn more about it and be able to include some of the like autistic accommodations and things like that in there. So families are open to at least learning about it, even with the promise that it's not going to go in any kind of written record. I just want, we want to be able to understand your kid better and have them be able to understand themselves better might be one way to address that a little bit. There are people doing kind of private pay assessments where they can do the assessment, but the documentation only goes to the family. And so there isn't any other record, and then the family gets to control where that information goes, if it goes anywhere. So sometimes that can be another way to do it, is to kind of figure out like, yes, this is autism, and no, we don't want kid doesn't need any extra support with it. We don't want anyone else to know at this point. We just want the kid to be able to have a better understanding of themselves kind of thing, and that can be another way.
Do you have any advice for if you're working with someone who has autistic meltdown or shutdown in the moment?
I think knowing that their brain is mostly offline, they're kind of just in like emotional response kind of territory. So not using a lot of words, staying calm yourself. Ideally, you might, especially since I know this is people that you're clients that you're working with, kind of having a plan in place ahead of time can sometimes be helpful, where it's this, we're going to leave the room, you're going to get your headphones, you're going to get, whatever kind of thing. But having a lot of autistic people benefit from having a meltdown plan in place so that the people around them do know what to do if that happens.
Thank you very much. Good job.